r/ask Reddit. What's your I met a celebrity but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? My mom yelled at Pierce Brosnan. She and my dad were at a ski resort getting lunch. My mother gets quite hangry, an unfortunate trait I inherited, and was waiting in line to order. Right as she's about to order, a guy tried to cut in front of her and interrupt her. She snapped and told him to go to the back of the line like everyone else. She got her food and went back to my dad sitting there mouth wide open in shock. Do you know who that was? No? That was Pierce Brosnan. You just yelled at James Bond. Well, he shouldn't have tried to cut me. I was 10 years old in 2002 when my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo for the first time. It was a rainy day, so we practically had the whole place to ourselves except for 3 British kids running around, chaperoned by a woman. My mom quickly befriended the woman while I made like a kid and joined the horde, looking at spiders and scorpions and sharing in the awe and excitement of the animals. After about an hour, when we said our goodbyes, my mother told me that the kid, Daniel, who I had been hanging out with, had played Harry Potter in the movie that came out last year. I had thought he looked familiar. I was a student athlete in college and was required to volunteer a certain number of hours per year. One of the options was to help freshmen move in, which I obviously chose so I could scope out the new talent. I just finished helping move a kid's stuff and head back to the loading area, and a black SUV pulls up. Out hops Larry David, his ex-wife, and their daughter who was starting school. I immediately recognized him but played it cool. He wasn't getting a ton of recognition since I'm guessing not many college students are fans of Curb/Seinfeld. I introduced myself to them all and he introduced himself and said, "Hi, I'm Larry," and mentioned they were from LA. I replied and said, "I used to live in LA, and you look really familiar. Did we meet?" To which he replied, "No, I'm just one of those faces," and gave me a huge wink. He was cracking jokes the entire move and introducing himself to everyone just as Larry. Just as funny in person as he is on TV. After finishing the move, he was nice enough to take a pic with me. Great guy, and the only major celebrity I've ever met. My cousin rode a ski lift with Jack Black in Vail. Just the two of them. Her husband and I were in the lift behind them, freaking out. When we got off the lift, they'd gone their separate ways. We made our way to her. She was like, "Wow, that guy on my lift was so nice." We were like, "No shit, that was Jack Black." She was like the School of Rock guy. She was so embarrassed. She said she rambled on about living in Iowa for most of their conversation. We laughed our asses off. My friend's mom, over 70 years old, owns a small Asian grocery store. Post Malone came walking in with his girlfriend and his mom had no idea who he was. A few cute things happened. She was nervous because of his tattoos, but happy/not worried once he bought a lot of food. She had no idea he was a celebrity. She gave him a free snack for buying so much food and told him to come back for lunchtime for cheap and tasty gyoza. He did come back the next day. She was worried he would get mugged going to his car because of 3 big men outside, so she followed him outside. They were his bodyguards. She really liked his cool car. It was a Lamborghini. She told my friend about the encounter that evening and he pulled up a YouTube video based on the description. It was him. When Post Malone came back the next day for gyoza, she got a selfie with him. It's on my friend's phone, so I don't have the picture available right now. Whole thing is adorable with how innocent his mom is. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant right outside LA in the late 90s. One day Leonardo DiCaprio came in with who I assume was his mom to have lunch. This would have been post-Titanic, so really at the peak of his breakthrough mega celeb status. He was wearing a ball cap, sunglasses and unshaven, but I recognized him anyway. I didn't let anyone know and I wrote something like, "Your movies are awesome, I hope you liked our food," on his receipt when I dropped it off at the table. After he left, I swung by and picked up his payment and he had left me a note back that said, "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover," with a $100 tip. It was awesome. I was only like 19. I went and got some PlayStation games with it after my shift ended. My dad met Robin Williams in an elevator. He got in and they rode a few floors in silence. They stopped on a floor and a bunch of fans ran in and started getting pics with Robin. My dad said he was gracious and took pics with everyone. The doors closed and they rode a few more floors and my dad turned and said, "Does that ever get old?" And Robin smiled and said, "Nope. Never." Then my dad got off on his floor and they nodded to one another and my dad went on with his day. In the mid-90s I was a cab driver. Our service was like a cross between a limo and a taxi, and we serviced some fancy resorts. As I dropped off my passenger at a resort, another guy asks if I'm a taxi, and I say yes, so he tells his friend their cab is here. His friend got in the car and said, "This ain't no cab, smells too good to be a cab," in that unmistakable Chris Rock voice. He and his friend just bull-spitted with each other for the 15-minute drive to a local nightclub. There was a white kid trying to talk to a yellow cab driver ahead of us in the parking lot and Chris Rock started imitating the kid, like, "I need a ride, yeah, I'm drunk, but I need a ride," and I was trying really hard not to laugh out loud. He wasn't nearly as famous yet at the time, but I had seen his stand-up routines on Comedy Central and knew exactly who he was, but didn't go fanboy on him. 10 out of 10 would drive Chris Rock again. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan, so walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, do you work here?" He replied, "I mean, yeah, kind of." I say, "What can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "No, I'm just ducking with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. When I was younger with fewer responsibilities, I used to just drive around for the hell of it. To me, driving is a hobby. Late at night was my favorite time. The streets are empty. My uncle is like this too. I asked him if he wanted to meet at American Coney Island. We sat down in a booth. A couple guys walked in after us and sat down behind us. Eminem, Dr. Dre, and a guy I later found out was Jimmy Iovine. We paid them no attention, but we knew who they were. They finished before us and as they were walking out, Eminem nodded at us and said, "Thanks for not making a big deal about this. We got you." He and the other guys disappeared around the corner. Em took that pretty well considering you acted like you forgot about Dre. About 5 years ago my dad was in LA for business and got into the elevator of his hotel to head down to one of his meetings. When he got in, he instantly recognized a huge, legendary, Hall of Fame LA Laker standing next to him. Normally, my father would never say anything but for some reason felt compelled to introduce himself. He stuck out his hand and said, "Shaq, it's nice to meet ya." He immediately realized he messed up and the guy responded, "I'm Magic Johnson, but it's nice to meet you too." The second-hand embarrassment is real. I was at a test screening of the movie Valkyrie. Me and my friends were near the front of the theater talking before the movie started, and I went on this big, loud rant about how normally I like Tom Cruise movies but War of the Worlds was such a piece of shit, one of the worst movies I've ever seen, plot didn't make sense, they strung a bunch of cool scenes together and put a happy ending on it and called it a day. After I wrap up my 5-minute rant outlining everything wrong with War of the Worlds, the person sitting behind us tapped me on the shoulder and pointed 4 seats down in my row to Tom Cruise glaring at me. I gave him the nod and sat there for what might have been the longest 10 minutes before our movie started ever. Not quite what you were asking for, but close enough for an excuse to tell that story. Me and my wife were on a trip for 9 days with Rainn Wilson, Dwight from The Office, and his family. I know he doesn't like being treated like he's just a character from a TV show, so I refrained from mentioning it or even letting on that I knew he was a famous actor. One day he had a sandwich with some beetroot in it, turns to his wife and says, "These beets are really amazing." It took every bit of me not to say something about Dwight then. He's a fantastic guy, and his family is lovely. Smile. My husband was vacationing in Arizona, killing time in a bar over a burger and a beer. A guy sits next to him and my husband has a nice chat with him. The guy leaves and my husband goes to close his tab and the bartender tells him it's been covered by the guy he was talking to. The bartender asks if he knows who he was talking to. My husband has no idea. Chuck Norris, it was his bar. Edit, how embarrassing. It wasn't Arizona, it is Woody's Wharf in Newport, California and still exists today. The story is still true. I just flaked on the location. Thanks for all the fun comments.